Disclaimer, full endgame gameplay spoilers. I'm recording footage from my clear save, so you're gonna be seeing fully built units and advanced classes on late game maps. I will avoid any story spoilers where possible, though. I am pleased to say I've finally played and beaten Final Fantasy Tactics. This is one of the pillars that SRPGs were built on, so I'm happy to finally cross that off my list. To be honest, it was just a matter of time before I decided to emulate it, but I did put it off long enough for it to be re-released on Steam. Then I exercised enough discipline to wait for it to go on sale before snagging it. My overall thoughts are that I liked it, but I don't make videos of things I didn't enjoy, so liking it was a given. There were some 30-year-old vibes to the game, and I'm happy SRPGs have moved away from it, but all in all, it felt tighter than the other 30-year-old game that I've played, which was Tactics Ogre Reborn. Now, the comparison between FFT and Tactics Ogre is inevitable, given it is directed by the same dude and they're very similar in gameplay and vibe. I do want to keep direct comparison between the two to this dedicated section, but I know the comparison will inevitably pop up elsewhere. In general, the way I would describe it is FFT is a much more compact version of TOR. Fewer classes, fewer mechanics, smaller maps, smaller squads, and that's why I said earlier FFT feels like a much tighter experience than TOR. I like it better this way, as one of my main issues with TOR was that there was just so many things all over the place that you're forced to engage with. FFT being more condensed was much appreciated. While I definitely liked FFT more, I do wish FFT had maybe half the optional content that TOR had. FFT had almost no side content besides a longish side quest chain and one optional dungeon in Midlight. On the flip side, TOR had way too much optional stuff to the point I couldn't get through all of it in 200 hours. I reckon if the two met in the middle, that would be the perfect sweet spot. The bottom line is, I didn't have any issues with the length of the main FFT campaign, but I do wish there were more optional or post-game things to do. Beyond that, I do have a lot of scattered thoughts and observations about the game. Before I get there, I want you to keep in mind that I very much liked this game, and it hit all the lofty expectations I set for it. However, there isn't a lot to talk about when you like something, so I'm just not going to. I'm worried that if I don't preface this, the next section could potentially come off as super critical and nitpicky. And for the record, to properly frame this section, I went into the game almost blind on Night difficulty. Okay, so one nitpick that I have about the game is the pacing, and this is an entire can of worms, so let me try to unpack this bit by bit. As I was playing the game, I thought to myself how much I appreciated how quickly you can progress the story in a Fire Emblem game compared to Final Fantasy Tactics. Now, in FFT, the next story battle is always available to you, but the difficulty curve makes me think the game intends for you to grind, reclass, and experiment a bunch between the major story beats. My thought was really more about how in Fire Emblem, I was confident that as long as my experience was distributed relatively evenly, my power level would be right where the game intends for me to be. No need to grind, just do your gear check, do some supports, and off you go to the next map. With FFT, I got slapped pretty hard by the battle in the slums, which I later found out was an infamous difficulty spike. Seeing the tier 2 classes on the opponent's squad, I knew the intention was I needed to get to tier 2 myself as well, and spend some time on getting some JP so I could actually use the abilities in the new class. This meant there was some grinding to be done. I have no doubt there was probably a way to brute force it with strategy alone, but I made the decision to do what I think the game wanted me to do. Okay, so now we're grinding to reclass. Reclassing and promotion in FFT is free, so you can switch between them as long as you hit the prerequisite levels in one or more classes. Now, the problem is, with this, I had way too much fun experimenting with classes and crafting a well-rounded squad. By the time I went back to the infamous slums, I cakewalked through it because the side effect of grinding reclass and getting JP means I also power leveled past the point where the game intends I should be. I think it's the incentive to experiment and my natural tendency to over-prepare for story battles that led me to basically outscaling the game on most occasions. As I progressed and my squad settled into their intended final roles, I was able to fall back more in line with the curve a little bit better. I feel like when the story started throwing those Zodiac MacGuffin monsters at me, I was in a pretty good spot. On the topic of experimenting with classes, another nitpicky thing would be how limited the deployment slots are. I'm really back and forth on this, because the more compact nature of FFT is part of the appeal. It's just that, playing blind, I always wanted to bring the most reliable squad to every story battle, and eventually the squad of 4 to 5 just became extremely static. It's basically one DPS, and that's Ramza, a Time Mage who is the primary buffer and healer, Agrius who is a frontline unit that moonlights as a secondary healer in DPS, Beowulf who is a debuffer, and then finally there is one flex slot. For story battles, you don't get to see the enemy composition until you've selected your units and started the map. Furthermore, the game deliberately hides what the Stone MacGuffin bosses do, so even more reason to bring the safest, most versatile squad to every story battle. The catch-up mechanics in this game aren't super generous either, plus half of each unit's power is locked behind abilities, so JP. This means benched units that fall behind in levels and JP don't give you a lot of incentive to catch them up. I guess this isn't too different from other SRPGs, but I must say having such a limited deployment slot and such distinct classes makes it feel kinda shitty to relegate and bench so many units. So in the end, I spent a good deal of time getting a lot of units to their intended classes with intended builds, just for them to stay glued to the bench. The only time they see action is in optional battles, which, coming full circle, inadvertently makes the power level past difficulty curve. I think this will not be a problem in a second playthrough, since by then I'll know to be more intentional with build paths. I'll also know what to expect in story battles, so I can actually diversify my lineups. Okay, enough nitpicking. I do want to rattle off a few things that I really liked. So the first thing is the battle map timeline is amazing. The nature of Ramza's role in the war as a neutral party means that the actual war itself isn't super apparent. Being able to see how the story unfolds, the battle lines, and the different people, it makes everything so much clearer. Fire Emblem Fates should have taken a page from this approach, because one of the main criticisms of Fates, and there are a lot, is that Nor and Hoshido War never felt truly real, and it was only mentioned in passing in dialogues. The second thing is God bless the very thorough and comprehensive guide section. I think after playing TOR and troubleshooters, I've come to realize that I've taken a complete comprehensive in-game help section for granted. The third thing is Chocobos can go eat a bag of dicks. And lastly, I also dig the character art presentation. There's just something about how simplistic and lacking in rendering the characters' faces are, to the point the nose is practically not there. A lot of anime-adjacent games end up with very generic art direction, but FFT and anything by Square Enix in general isn't one of those. Otherwise, yeah, that's pretty much everything I wanted to get off my chest. So great game, glad to have finally played it.